In 1942, high in the Indian Himalayas, more than 5,000 meters above the sea, a British forest ranger climbed to the shore of a small glacial lake and looked down into water so cold it stays frozen for most of the year. That summer, the ice had melted back, and in the shallows and scattered across the stony banks, he saw bones. Not a few, not a dozen, hundreds of them, skulls and shoulder blades and long bones, some still joined, some loose, some resting on the bottom of the lake and staring up through the meltwater. By the counts that came later, the remains of somewhere between 300 and 800 human beings lay around and inside that single small lake. The place is called Roopkund, and the ranger who found it that summer became the first outsider to face the question that has hung over it ever since. Who were all these people? What were hundreds of them doing at once in one of the most remote, most punishing, most lifeless places a human body can stand? And what killed them all together, so far from anywhere, and left them here at the roof of the world, to freeze and thaw and freeze again for century after century? He had a guess. It was wrong. And the truth, when science finally reached it, turned out to be stranger than his guess, and then stranger again, because Roopkund does not hold one mystery. It holds at least two, stacked on top of each other, separated by 1,000 years, and the second one has never been solved at all. Tonight, we are going to climb up to that lake. We are going to look at what the ranger found, and what the bones themselves confessed once the science got good enough to ask them, and at the old song, the song the mountain people have been singing for longer than anyone can trace, that turned out to know the answer before any scientist did. Let us start with the lake, because you cannot understand the deaths without understanding the place. Roopkund sits in a bowl of rock and ice in the high Himalayas of the Indian state of Uttarakhand. To get there, even now, you walk. There is no road that reaches it. You climb for days, up through forest and then above the trees, up past the line where nothing grows, into a world of bare stone and thin, cold air. At that altitude, the body begins to struggle simply to exist. The oxygen is scarce. The temperature drops hard and fast when the light goes or the weather turns. There is no shelter, no caves to speak of, no trees to break the wind or the sky. If something comes down out of that sky, there is nowhere to hide. Remember that. It matters more than anything else in this story. The lake itself is small. You could walk around it without much effort, if the effort of simply being there were not already so great. It is shallow, and for most of the year, it is locked under ice. Only in the brief window of the warmer months does the ice draw back and reveal what the water has been holding. Bones, everywhere. It is not for nothing that the place earned the name the world uses for it now, the Lake of Skeletons. When the ranger found it in 1942, the world was at war, and his mind went where a wartime mind would go. He assumed the bones were soldiers. Specifically, he guessed they might be Japanese troops who had died attempting to move through the mountains toward India on foot. It was a reasonable guess for a man standing in that spot in that year. It was also completely wrong, and it would take decades and a very different kind of investigation to show just how wrong. Because the bones were far, far older than any soldier of that war, and they had a story to tell that no one in 1942 was equipped to hear. Move forward now, past the middle of the century, into the era when forensic science and the study of old bones had grown powerful enough to interrogate the dead directly. Researchers began to examine the Roopkund remains properly, and the first thing the bones gave up was the manner of death, and it was not what anyone expected. Look at the skulls. Look at the bones of the shoulders, the tops of the spines. Nearly all of them showed the same thing, deep, rounded fracture wounds. Cracks and depressions in the bone made by blunt, rounded objects striking with tremendous force. And here is the detail that turned the whole case. The injuries were not on the arms, not on the sides, not the sort of wounds you get from fighting, from a sword or an arrow or a fall. They were on the tops of the skulls and the tops of the shoulders. The blows had come from directly above. Every one of them, struck from the sky. Sit with that image. Hundreds of people, out in the open, above the tree line, with nowhere to run and nothing to hide beneath. And something came down on them from straight overhead, again and again, cracking skulls and shoulders until they were dead. Whatever it was, it did not come from another person. So what falls from a Himalayan sky in enough quantity to kill hundreds of people at once, striking each of them on the head and shoulders from directly above? The science settled on an answer, and it is an answer that sounds almost too simple for a horror this large, until you understand the scale of it. Hail. A hailstorm. But not the kind of hailstorm you have ever stood in. The dating placed the main event at around the 9th century, roughly the year 850. And the reconstruction that emerged was of a catastrophe. A group of people, most likely travelers, pilgrims perhaps, moving through that high open ground with local guides and porters, caught completely in the open when a monstrous storm broke over them. Hailstones the size of cricket balls, the size of baseballs, as much as 9 inches around by some estimates, falling from tens of thousands of feet, reaching killing speed by the time they arrived. Ice as hard and heavy as stone, hammering down out of the sky onto people who had absolutely nowhere to go. No trees, no caves, no walls, just the open mountain and the sky opening up on them. It would have been over quickly. That is perhaps the only mercy in it. Hundreds of people struck down almost where they stood, in minutes, by ice falling from heaven. And then the cold took them, and the ice sealed them, and the lake kept them for 1,100 years. Now, here is where this story does something that gives me chills every time, and it has nothing to do with anything invented. Because the mountain people who live in that region, the Pahari people of those valleys, the communities who for generation upon generation have made the sacred pilgrimage through those heights, they already knew. Not the dating, not the forensics, but the shape of it. They carry a traditional song. It belongs to an ancient pilgrimage, one of the great sacred journeys of that part of the Himalayas, undertaken across the same terrifying high ground where the lake sits. And the song, passed down by voice across the centuries, tells of the goddess of the mountain and of her fury. It tells of a group who offended the sacred ground, who profaned it in the tellings with dancing and revelry and disrespect where only reverence was allowed. And the goddess in her anger is said to have hurled down hail from the sky, hard as iron, to strike the offenders dead where they stood. Hail, hard as iron, from the sky. For a very long time, that song was treated as exactly what it appeared to be. A legend, a piece of folklore, a story the mountain people told, beautiful and grim and not to be taken literally. And then the bones spoke, and the forensic science laid out its conclusion. Hundreds of people killed by rounded impacts from directly above, in the open, at that lake, by a catastrophic fall of ice from the sky. And suddenly the song was not just a legend anymore. The song was a memory. Somewhere across 1,100 years of voices, the essential truth of what happened at that lake had been preserved, wrapped in the language of gods and punishment, but accurate at its core. The people of those mountains had been singing the correct answer for centuries before science arrived to confirm it. I want to be careful and honest here, the way I always try to be with you. We cannot prove that the song describes that specific event. Songs like it exist across many traditions, and it is possible the connection is one that later listeners drew because it fit so well. But the fit is extraordinary. A tradition warning of death by ice, hurled from the sky, sung by the very people whose ancestors guided travelers across the ground, where hundreds died exactly that way. Whether the song remembers Roopkund directly, or whether it simply preserves the hard-earned knowledge that these mountains can and do kill from above. Either way, the old voices carried something true that the modern world had forgotten and had to learn all over again from cracked bone. And that, you might think, is the end of it. A tragic mass death, an apocalyptic storm, a folk psalm vindicated, a closed case, except it is not closed. Because in recent years, a large genetic study reopened the whole thing and broke it wide open. And this is the part almost nobody knows. The part that turns Roopkund from a solved tragedy back into a genuine, standing, unexplained mystery. Researchers sequenced the DNA from dozens of the skeletons, and they found something that should not have been possible. The people at the lake did not all die together. The large group, the 9th century victims, the ones from around the year 850, the ones the hailstorm story fits, those people were of South Asian origin. Local, broadly speaking. Indian, travelers and their guides on high ground, exactly as the reconstruction supposed. That part held. But mixed in among the bones was another group, a smaller set of people. And when their DNA was read, it did not point to India, or to the Himalayas, or to anywhere in Asia at all. It pointed to the eastern Mediterranean, to the region of Greece and the island of Crete. People from the far side of the world, genetically speaking, thousands of miles away. And they had not died in the 9th century with the others. The dating placed this second group roughly 1,000 years later, around the year 1800. Read that again, because it is one of the strangest facts I know of. A group of people with Mediterranean ancestry from the region of Greece and Crete died at the same tiny, remote, impossibly high Himalayan lake, the same lake of skeletons, but a full 1,000 years after the great hailstorm. Different people, different origin, different century, same lake. What in the world were travelers from the eastern Mediterranean doing at the top of a Himalayan mountain around the year 1800? How did they get there? Why did they go? What drew them across half the planet to that specific, obscure, deadly little lake, so far from any road, so far from anything? And how did they die? Was it another storm, another accident, or something we have not even guessed at? Nobody knows. The genetic study could tell us where they came from and roughly when they died. It could not tell us why they were there or what happened to them. On those questions, Roopkund keeps its silence. So the lake holds two mysteries stacked. The first, the ancient one, we have largely answered. The storm, the bones, the song that remembered. But answering it only exposed the second, the newer one, the one hiding underneath. And that one remains completely open, a cluster of people from the shores of the Mediterranean, dead at the roof of the Himalayas around 1800, for reasons that have left no record we can read. Every explanation offered for that second group is a guess. Perhaps they were part of some expedition, some journey of trade or faith or curiosity that took an impossible turn and ended at that lake. Perhaps they were following the same pilgrimage routes the local people had walked for centuries, drawn for reasons of their own into ground that had already killed hundreds. Perhaps there is a connection we simply cannot see from here, some thread that ran from the Mediterranean to that Himalayan bowl of ice and bone. Or perhaps the truth is stranger than any of those, and it went into the cold with them, and it is still there, waiting, under the ice. The lake freezes again every year. The ice closes back over the bones, and for most of the year, Roopkund looks like nothing at all. A small, frozen pool in a bare, high place, silent, still, giving nothing away. Then the warm months come, the ice draws back, and the dead surface again, hundreds of them, from two different worlds and two different centuries, resting together in water that never truly warms. The old song still gets sung on the pilgrimage. warning of the goddess and her hail of iron. The scientists still argue over the DNA. And the second group, the travelers from the far Mediterranean, still lie among the 9th century dead with no explanation at all. A 1,000-year gap between one death and the next, both of them ending in the same shallow, frozen, impossible water. The mountain remembered the first tragedy in a song. It has not yet given us a song for the second. Maybe it never will. Maybe some things happen so far from everything, so high and so cold and so alone, that no memory survives them at all. Only the bones, surfacing each summer, asking a question the world has never been able to answer. If this is the kind of story that stays with you after the screen goes dark, the kind you turn over on the walk to your car, the kind you find yourself thinking about at the edge of sleep, then subscribe, because there is more of it coming, more high places, more old psalms that turned out to be true, more questions the science answered halfway and then left you standing in the cold with the rest. The mountain does not care whether we solve it. It has waited this long. It can wait longer.